Who was Habakkuk? The book of Habakkuk is the 8th among the minor prophets, but the truth is, we know very little about who Habakkuk was beyond what's written in the book that bears his name. He likely lived during the same time as Jeremiah, Nahum, and Zephaniah. The name Habakkuk means embrace, and it could symbolize both his close relationship with God and a future where our Creator embraces all nations. God's responses to Habakkuk's questions reveal how he views sin and its consequences, teaching us that faith is the key to understanding our ultimate destiny. In today's video, we'll dive into the story of this intriguing prophet. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and if you enjoy the video, give it a like. It really helps us keep producing content for you. Habakkuk lived in a difficult time. He doesn't mention Assyria, but he does talk about the rising power of the Chaldeans, also known as the Babylonians. Therefore, we can conclude that he prophesied in Judah, likely during the reign of Jehoiakim, just before Nebuchadnezzar's invasion. It doesn't seem like Josiah's reforms were still in effect, as Habakkuk laments the widespread wickedness and injustice among the people. He was tasked with predicting the invasion and destruction of Judah by the Chaldeans. The northern kingdom, Israel, had already been taken into captivity by Assyria, and now it was Judah's turn to face God's punishment through the Babylonians. The book of Habakkuk begins with a heavy question. How long, Lord, must I call for help, and you do not listen, or cry out to you violence, and you do not save? Habakkuk couldn't understand why it seemed like God didn't care about Judah's sins. Even though he knew God didn't tolerate the people's wickedness, he wanted answers. And God responded, he would not leave Judah unpunished. God would raise up the Chaldeans as a tool of correction and punishment. The Chaldeans were a cruel and destructive people who would invade the land without mercy. But this answer only perplexed Habakkuk further. How could a holy and just God use a nation even more wicked and corrupt to punish Judah? God's response was clear. In the end, everyone will be judged fairly. Only those who trust in God and remain faithful to Him will live. Arrogance, pride, and evil deeds will not go unpunished, and no one will escape the consequences of wrongdoing. Habakkuk was instructed to write everything he saw so clearly that anyone passing by could understand it. The vision he received was destined to be fulfilled at a specific time in the future. With the assurance that wickedness wouldn't go unpunished, the prophet pronounced a series of 5 woes against those who disobey God and His laws. From the context, it seems these woes were directed at the Chaldeans, who believed they were untouchable. But no one escapes God's law, the famous law of sowing and reaping. No one who acts with arrogance, pride, and excessive violence will go unpunished. The prophet Habakkuk identified 7 major sins among the Chaldeans: aggression, pride, greed, rampant violence, idolatry, abuse of power, and covetousness. At the end of the book, the prophet offers a prayer in the form of a psalm, praising God. According to Habakkuk 3:19, this prayer was meant to be sung, showing us the musical and devotional side of the prophet. When Habakkuk realized God's judgment was drawing near, he expressed concern and asked the Lord for mercy. Even knowing the gravity of what was coming, he recalled God's great deeds in the past, such as His presence at Mount Sinai, the parting of the Red Sea and the Jordan River, and divine help in Israel's battles. As he envisioned what was yet to come, Habakkuk trembled, but nothing in this world can shake God's promises. He declared, "Yet I will rejoice in the Lord, I will be joyful in God my Savior. The sovereign Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the feet of a deer. He enables me to tread on the heights." Habakkuk was a prophet of faith, firmly believing that God would fulfill His promises. He knew that one day the whole earth would be filled with the knowledge of the glory of God, as the waters cover the sea. The book of Habakkuk is quoted several times in the New Testament, showing how his message remains relevant. In Acts 13:40-41, Paul uses Habakkuk 1:5 to warn the people of Antioch, and this warning is still valid for us today. Additionally, 3 epistles reference Habakkuk 2:3-4 to emphasize the importance of faith. In the book of Hebrews, chapter 10, Paul uses Habakkuk's words to remind Christians that while we await Christ's return, we must live by faith. And in Romans 1:16-17, he highlights that faith in the gospel leads to salvation. The central point is, the righteous will live by faith. But what does this really mean? To live by faith is to trust in God completely, even when the days are tough and the future seems uncertain. Habakkuk believed that despite all the adversities, there was a glorious future for God's people. In Hebrews chapter 11, called the chapter of faith, we are reminded that without faith, it is impossible to please God. Faith makes us believe that God's promises will be fulfilled, even though we haven't yet seen them. And in the end, faith gives us the strength to walk with God and persevere to the end. That's why Habakkuk's message is clear. The righteous will live by faith, and this trust in God is what guides us toward a certain and glorious future. Habakkuk's life teaches us important lessons for today. The importance of questioning with faith. Habakkuk wasn't afraid to express his doubts to God, repeatedly asking how long he would allow injustice to prevail. This teaches us that it's valid to question God when we are confused or overwhelmed by the evil around us, as long as our questions come from a heart full of faith and trust. Habakkuk wasn't doubting God's character, but was longing to understand his plans. He believed that God always has an answer, even when circumstances seem to suggest otherwise. This lesson encourages us to bring our doubts and anxieties to God, knowing that He is attentive and acts at the right time. God uses even evil to fulfill His purposes. One of the most difficult teachings in the book of Habakkuk is how God used the Babylonians, an even more wicked nation, to correct Judah. This reminds us that God, in His sovereignty, can turn even evil and injustice into a means of fulfilling His greater plans. He is not the author of evil, but nothing escapes His control. In our lives, we may not understand why certain adversities come our way, but we need to trust that God is orchestrating every detail for the good of those who love Him. So, even amid chaos, He is working on something greater and more just. God's justice is impartial. Although the Babylonians were God's instrument of correction for Judah, they themselves would not escape divine judgment. Habakkuk teaches us that no one is above God's justice. He doesn't ignore evil, pride, or violence, whether in nations or individuals. Just as the Chaldeans suffered the consequences of their actions, all human deeds are under God's watchful eye, and each person will answer for their own actions. This calls us to live justly and rightly, knowing that God is an impartial judge who sees and judges with righteousness. Faith is the key to facing difficult times. The famous phrase, "the righteous will live by faith," lies at the heart of Habakkuk's message. Amid the impending destruction, the prophet teaches us that faith is the foundation that sustains believers in times of calamity. Faith in God is the only way to find peace and strength, even when everything around us is falling apart. For us, this lesson is incredibly relevant. In moments of uncertainty, when the world seems out of control, it is faith that keeps us steady. Trust in God and His promises gives us the courage needed to face daily challenges, reminding us that He is faithful in all things. Remembering God's deeds in the past. When Habakkuk realized what was coming, he trembled with fear, but found hope by remembering the great works God had done in the past. By recalling events such as Israel's deliverance from Egypt and God's protection in battles, he gained strength to face the uncertain future. This teaches us the importance of looking back and remembering the ways God has already worked in our lives. When we do this, we find confidence and hope for what lies ahead. Even in the darkest times, remembering God's deeds reminds us of His faithfulness, which strengthens our faith. Patience in the silence of God. Habakkuk began his book crying out for an answer from God amidst Judah's injustice. And at first, it seemed like God was silent. Often we go through periods where it feels like God isn't hearing our prayers or answering as we expect.